Welcome back everyone, it's Charlie. This is going to be my Marvel Avengers game review. Recently, like a lot of you, I had a chance to play the beta, so I'll try to cover as much of it as possible without any big spoilers for parts of the story that they didn't already reveal in the trailer footage. So if you're new to the channel, be sure to subscribe to get all the videos. We are doing a giveaway for a copy of the game. All you have to do to enter is be a subscriber and leave your favorite big Marvel game on the video. I'm sure a lot of you are going to say Spider-Man PS4. I will be referencing Spider-Man PS4, the gameplay, the story a lot when talking about Marvel's Avengers, because it is the closest comparison in terms of the way the game works, the way the story works. And I will be discussing all the parts of the game, Marvel Avengers, that they already publicly revealed in the previous trailers. So far, it does have the potential to be a solid game. It doesn't hold a candle to Spider-Man PS4 yet, but the game hasn't even launched yet, it's still in beta, so hopefully with some patches they can tune some of the aspects and the things that I wasn't really happy with. But the first big gameplay that you get into at the beginning is the San Francisco fight, the tutorial mission that they use to teach you about all the game systems, the mechanics, the character abilities, the dynamics. You start with the Avengers in the past on a mission in San Francisco. That's the mission you saw in all the early trailer footage where they're fighting Taskmaster, who's working for MODOK and AIM. They wind up framing the Avengers in a plot to destroy the public's trust in them. It's this big MODOK plan involving Inhumans. So Taskmaster, obviously getting ready to show up in the MCU for the first time in the Black Widow movie. We would have already seen him, were it not for the virus delaying all movies. So there are some story elements in the game that make you wonder if the developers were trying to gain some synergy by doing things in the story that the Marvel movies were also doing with its characters heading into Marvel Phase 4. This will make more sense in a second, because the game was originally supposed to come out closer to Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame, just riding all that hype. The whole theme of the game is built on the idea of Avengers disassembled from the comics, even though obviously things are very different from the comic book versions. Without getting into big spoilers, one of the main A-list Avengers winds up dying, or seemingly dying, during that big San Francisco attack that turns into this major disaster. The Avengers break up, quote-unquote disassemble, and then even though you get POV from all the Avengers characters, the main POV character, at least at the beginning, is mostly Kamala Khan's Miss Marvel. She's like the young up-and-coming Avengers fangirl who idolized all the Avengers, and she has to try and help the surviving Avengers reassemble to deal with this big Inhumans plot that MODOK has. Kevin Feige recently announced that Miss Marvel is getting a big Avengers Endgame spin-off Disney Plus series. We don't know when that's going to premiere, probably sometime in 2022 because they're casting it right now, but we don't know who's going to be playing the live-action Miss Marvel yet. But after a quick time jump, she and the Hulk go to start finding the other Avengers like Iron Man. So I will say, like, in terms of character dynamics, she actually does have a really good dynamic with the Hulk. So maybe we'll actually wind up seeing the Hulk show up during the Miss Marvel TV series. Mark Ruffalo already confirmed that he's going to be showing up during the She-Hulk Disney Plus series. And I will mention some She-Hulk stuff because we found out about some of the playable characters that Marvel Avengers is going to be dropping with DLC later on. Remember I said the game trying to use some synergy with what Marvel Phase 4 is doing with the movies and the TV shows. I was a big fan of the comic book stuff that they were trying to riff on with the game, even though everyone had their complaints about the way the characters look. I feel like all the actors' performances were solid. I feel like it was kind of unrealistic to expect the game to use the same characters as the movies, like Robert Downey Jr. would charge tens of millions of dollars to use his likeness. There's no way the game was going to spend an extra $100 million to get the likeness rights for all the characters and to get the actors to come in to perform all the motion capture for that stuff. It's the same situation as Spider-Man PS4. None of those characters look like the movie versions of the characters. In terms of the overall story, I feel like right now as it is, it's not quite as good as the story of Spider-Man PS4, but I think part of the reason for that is that they're trying to juggle so many more characters. We're talking about the Avengers here. In Spider-Man PS4, really only had to focus on one character, Spider-Man himself, with the other characters around him being relatively minor by comparison. That's the main reason why most big directors don't want to even do huge Avengers movies, or can't do them. One of the reasons why the Russos were able to handle both Avengers Infinity War and Avengers Endgame is because there's two of them instead of just one of them. Even then, a lot of people complained that not all the Avengers characters got the scenes that they deserved during Avengers Endgame. There just wasn't room for everything. There's one thing right now about the character models in the game that people are complaining about that Spider-Man PS4 managed to nail, so I'm hoping that Marvel Avengers will be able to fix it later on. But one thing it does do better than Spider-Man PS4 is that it goes way further beyond when it comes to character customization and item customization. They give you this level of tuning that you can apply to character skills and gear stats that's great if you love that level of customization. Different gear designed for different boss fights, giving you bigger bonuses and certain skill trees and switching back and forth for different types of missions. And if you don't like digging that deep into characters and you feel like it's way too complicated through the menu system, they do have a really simple option built in that just gives you the best possible loadout and settings for your gear. But the real problem, as you've probably heard other reviewers talking about, is the fact that different gear, all the different suits, the stats, the items, don't really have any effect on your character's physical appearance in the game. So even if you gear up with a bunch of really cool armor and weapons on the different Avengers characters, your character won't look any different running around, and it's something that they need to change, because Spider-Man PS4 nailed this aspect of the game. Part of the whole fun of Spider-Man PS4 is trying out all of Spider-Man's different suits and then seeing him web-sling around the city wearing them in the game. I think part of the difficulty in Marvel Avengers doing this, at least at launch, is the fact that they have so many more playable characters that they would have to implement that feature for, whereas in Spider-Man PS4, you just have one character, Spider-Man, with a ton of different looks. The actual gameplay was a little buggy, but the game is still in beta, so you kind of expect that as of me posting this video. Overall, the gameplay was fun, but the minor complaint that I have, that I think a lot of other people had, was that the main characters, who are supposed to have wildly different power levels in the comics, like the Hulk, vastly more powerful than Iron Man, Miss Marvel, Black Widow, didn't really feel like he was doing more damage per fight than any of the other characters. Like right now, as the game has been balanced, you could use any of the characters for any of the boss fights early on, and it wouldn't make any difference. There was a hilarious bug this past weekend that a user found that allowed the Hulk to jump into Iron Man's Hulkbuster armor. Nice Avengers Infinity War Easter egg. Hopefully they don't patch that out too fast. But one character that you only get a little time to experience early on is Thor. You only get a little with him in the early mission. He's a lot of fun, but like I said, it's that same interchangeable powers problem. Aside from a few different abilities, he doesn't feel like he gives you an epic advantage over playing as the Hulk or Iron Man. Maybe this is something that'll change later in the endgame content when the character's skills become more specialized and the boss fights become way harder. I know you all have questions about what's going on with Spider-Man in the game. He was not playable in the beta. That's only going to be available after launch on the PlayStation versions of the game. So the way they explain it is that the Spider-Man story content will be different from the main path, so it'll feel more like traditional DLC extra missions. So if you do have the Xbox version and you can't play as Spider-Man, you won't be missing any critical story or gear that would give you a big advantage over not having Spider-Man. There were a lot of websites this week that were claiming that the Spider-Man that shows up in the game, though, won't be Insomniac's version from Spider-Man PS4, so take that for what you will. It sounds like it'll be a slightly different version of Peter Parker Spider-Man. There were a lot of people that saw that Miles Morales Spider-Man PS5 trailer, and they're like, maybe Peter Parker isn't there because he's busy over in San Francisco with the Avengers game, so that just kind of debunks that theory. The other characters that we actually just found out about that they're releasing after launch as DLC later in the game are Hawkeye, then War Machine, She-Hulk, and then the Kate Bishop Hawkeye. There might be more new characters after that later on, but those are the only ones that we know about right now. Many thanks to everyone that data mined those extra characters. You only get a little bit of MODOK early on. He's the main villain. They kind of explained the whole Inhuman subplot during that last big trailer. MODOK and AIM are the big villains of the game, trying to control Inhumans, which have been proliferating all over the Earth. All the robots that you see with those Wolverine-looking claws are the super adaptoid robots from the comics, which are also creations of AIM's. And speaking of Wolverine, here's another one of the weaknesses I feel like of the game, and just a symptom of game development in general, because it takes so long to do this. Because they started developing the game years ago, way before Marvel ever got the rights to the characters back, and they were trying to gain some synergy from Avengers Infinity War, Avengers Endgame, Marvel Phase 4 stuff, it feels like that's why they went for Inhumans in the game instead of using X-Men, because I feel like right now, just in terms of big Marvel movies, most people are hyped up to see the new MCU versions of the X-Men characters. So it may have benefited the game more had they leaned harder into X-Men. But like I said, when they started developing the game, the X-Men characters were still with Fox, so they were probably trying to swerve on that at the time. The developers did confirm, though, that they were allowed to use X-Men characters in their game, so there might be some more X-Men characters that pop up later through DLC. It would be really badass to see Wolverine show up in the Marvel Avengers game. If you don't know anything about MODOK, he was actually a character that was rumored to be in Ant-Man 3 in the Marvel movies, but MODOK is actually an acronym that stands for Mental Organism Designed Only for Killing. He starts out as a normal person who's turned into this creation, but then he winds up rebelling against AIM and taking over the organization himself. Eventually, after the Avengers wind up capturing him, they throw him in prison. He starts working for the government in order to commute his sentence. Thinking about Thunderbolts Easter eggs, it's always possible that they could do something with that, because we know that they're building up to a big Thunderbolts project in the MCU. Just think about all those villains that are chilling out on the raft right now, and imagine that is their home base in a Thunderbolts Disney Plus series. But if you're a big fan of the Avengers in the comics, the movies, or bigger AAA Marvel games like Spider-Man PS4, I feel like the Marvel Avengers game is fun, but it still has a long ways to go if it wants to beat Insomniac's Spider-Man PS4. And that doesn't even get into Spider-Man PS5 or the Miles Morales game, which is also coming out later this year. I will do separate videos about that, and I will give a couple of copies of the game away once they release it, but it's not coming out for a little while longer. Once you do have a chance to play Marvel Avengers though, let me know in the comments what you think of the game so far. And click here for that full Spider-Man PS5 Miles Morales trailer, and click here for my brand new Spider-Man 3 Marvel movie video. Thank you so much for watching, everyone stay safe, I'll see you guys tonight.